Welcome to the Containment Zone. The Foundation's first rule is absolute. Know your sites. Every facility, every station, every safe house, accounted for, cataloged, secure. So when a static-soaked transmission began broadcasting from deep beneath the Big Bend Ranch State Park in Texas, repeating a phrase over and over, "This is Site-13, requesting immediate assistance." The panic didn't come from the distress signal itself. It came from the fact that Site-13 doesn't exist, not on any operational map, not in any archival record, not even as a proposal. But the transmission was real, confirmed, sustained, looping, growing stronger, and most importantly, it was in Foundation code. A recovery task force was mobilized, equipped for deep structure reconnaissance, mimetic hazard protocols, and subterranean navigation. Their mission: locate the source, identify anomaly class, secure survivors, if any. But what they found, beneath the desert floor, was not a bunker, not a laboratory. It was a graveyard of gods, a complex built in mockery of the Foundation's design. Long corridors carved in blood-soaked concrete, warning signs written in ash, and doors, still trying to contain what should never have lived. Access was achieved through a collapsed maintenance shaft, one that hadn't existed on any geological survey just weeks before. The descent was steep, rust clung to every rung. Below, the temperature dropped, not gradually, instantly. Within moments of breaching the lower threshold, the team lost visual contact with the surface. Not due to light, due to interference. The moment the first agent stepped into the main corridor, their body cam began stuttering. Audio fractured, signal warped, and a new voice began to speak, embedded in the static. Containment failed. Containment failed. Containment failed. Over and over, like a child learning to pray. The layout was familiar. Too familiar. Site-13 had been constructed to mirror Foundation architecture. Same section markers, same SCP containment units, but wrong. Twisted, inverted. Alive in ways no building should be. Walls sweated, conduits pulsed, corridors hummed with something that sounded like breathing, but registered as ambient entropy. Security doors were scarred with claw marks that matched no known creature. Containment chambers lay shattered, some sealed from the inside. And then the clocks, hundreds of them, lining the halls, each ticking out of sync. Some spun forward at impossible speeds. Others ticked backward. A few hung still, hands missing, faces blank. But all of them, all, were set to the exact same date. October 19th, 1973. No records tied to that day, no major anomaly breaches, no incident files. But within Site-13, that date had become a gravitational point, a singularity of meaning. The team advanced. They found bodies, some fresh, some so desiccated they turned to dust when touched. Some were Foundation personnel, wearing badges that bore no known clearance level, wearing names that matched no current employee roster, except one, Dr. Thaddeus Yank, a name tied to temporal studies, a name erased from active projects 5 years ago, and scratched into the wall beside one of the decayed corpses. I was trying to fix it. The further the recovery team advanced into Site-13, the less the world resembled anything built by human hands. Fluorescent lights flickered without wiring. Hallways rearranged themselves behind the squad, doors vanishing, reappearing, opening into impossible angles. Entire wings existed, and then didn't. At the center of it all, a hum. Not mechanical, not natural. A low rhythmic pulse that resonated inside the bones, like something remembering itself. Beneath the floor, then the manifestations began. They came without warning. Shadows cast by no source of light. Bleeding silhouettes moving just at the edge of perception. One operative screamed upon seeing her childhood bedroom, perfectly reconstructed inside a containment chamber labeled SCP-2256-, a designation officially listed as never having been assigned. But there it was, furniture, photographs, the exact green lamp she had broken when she was 7. Another entered a janitorial closet and emerged into the middle of a conflict zone. Foundation security forces engaged in live combat against unclassifiable entities, grotesque shapes dripping membrane and flame, each combatant wearing clearance badges dated to October 1973. He returned seconds later, mouth torn open, but his voice echoed from somewhere inside the wall plating. It never ended. We just forgot to keep remembering it. They found files, real files, printed reports, handwritten logs describing anomalies the Foundation had never captured. Anomalies from other branches, other timelines, impossible futures. Some were familiar, SCPs that had been terminated. Others were completely unknown, described with meticulous detail and a tone of desperation. This one will not die. We have rebuilt the chamber 6 times. It keeps adapting. We can no longer contain it in any standard frame. And at the heart of every page, every corrupted transmission, chrono-lock compromised. Time hadn't shattered. It had curled inward, dragging history, memory, and identity into a recursive collapse. Site-13 wasn't just a place that fell, it was a narrative tomb, a closed-loop equation of trauma repeating itself until it created an entire facility from the ashes of what could have been. And inside that loop, every memory brought into the structure was consumed, restructured, and weaponized. The deeper the team went, the more they forgot who they were, and in their place came versions that may have always been there. At the lowest sub-level of Site-13, past stairwells that descended in impossible spirals and elevators that looped through non-existent floors, the task force reached the core. They had followed a map that no longer made sense. A blueprint scribbled in blood across the walls, a design that led only downward. And then they reached it. The engine, a cathedral of rusted steel and flickering reactors, pulsing with cables and spinal cords, all woven into a lattice that spoke in vibration rather than sound. In the center stood a column, 10 meters tall, covered in etched glyphs and Foundation sigils, fused with bone, human bone. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all melted into the structure as if the machine had fed on them. A data panel blinked erratically beside the console. It displayed the same message in loop text. Primary engine, temporal reconciliation core, status stalled, initiated by Dr. Thaddeus Zyank. Purpose, restoration. Result, cascade failure. They had found the heart of the collapse. This was not just an engine. It was an altar, built to rewrite time. Dr. Zyank, once head of temporal anomaly research, had tried to fix something. An event, a decision, a timeline too broken to survive. He had attempted to create a device that could reach into the past, pull a moment free, and correct it. Instead, he created a recursive loop of causality failure. Every attempt to change the past fed the machine more variables, more branches, more paradoxes, more lives. Crushed beneath the weight of correction, and Site-13 became the epicenter of a new kind of anomaly, A self-consuming timeline, one that devoured itself for failing to be perfect. Logs recovered from the core's memory bank revealed fractured conversations. We fixed SCP-1734, but now SCP-2669 doesn't exist. Reality is collapsing into versioned echoes. No one here is the original anymore. Stop the engine. But the engine is me. And then, a final entry. I turned it on. I couldn't stop it. I became the timeline. I can't remember which me was first. The task force barely had time to process what they were seeing. Before the lights dimmed, something behind the machine began to move. Not walk, not crawl, shift. Reality bent inward like cloth pulled from behind glass, and a silhouette emerged. Faceless. Flickering. Wearing a Foundation lab coat and an ID badge that read Thaddeus Zyank, redacted clearance, observer class. But this version of Zyank did not speak. It only pointed to the core and whispered, "This is the world I made, so you'd never know how badly I failed." And then the screaming began, not from the team, but from the structure itself, because Site-13 was alive, and it remembered everything. Once the core had been seen, Site-13 began to react. The structure convulsed. Ceilings cracked open like scar tissue. Pipes burst with black fluid that steamed on contact. Alarms wailed in voices, not sirens, but words, screaming in synthetic monotone. Unauthorized narrative detected. Restructuring commencing. The facility was no longer trying to be a Foundation site. It was becoming something else, something written in the language of regret. Containment units opened, not by power loss, but by choice, as if the building had determined there was no more reason to pretend. They came crawling out, entities the Foundation had never recorded, masses of tendons and recursive limbs, creatures that unfolded themselves like books written in geometry and sinew. But worse, familiar ones. The team witnessed something resembling SCP-106-, but younger, faster, hungrier. Another room released what appeared to be SCP-610, though its spread followed the walls like laughter in paint. And behind every glass, a name scratched with fingernails. Thaddeus did this. Because Site-13 was not just a prison, it was an ark, a containment facility built to house versions of anomalies that never existed. Outside the failed timelines Dr. Zyank had tampered with, each breach, each correction, each small change had created new horrors. Unreal, unapproved, unstable. And when his engine collapsed, the boundaries between those timelines disintegrated. This wasn't a breach. This was a return of everything the Foundation had never wanted to see again, of every version of every choice that someone had desperately tried to undo. And the Foundation's great secret? They didn't fix Site-13. They didn't contain it. They just forgot it. Let it fall below the world. Let the desert swallow it. Let the silence cover the evidence, like dust on an unopened file. But silence only works until the screaming gets loud enough to be found again. And now the transmission had returned, and the walls were remembering how to collapse. The extraction order came too late. By the time Overwatch Command received the final distress beacon from the embedded task force, only one signal remained active, broadcasting from every hallway at once. This is not Site-13. This is the consequence. Recovery drones sent to the surface encountered no resistance, no movement, only static and blood, and names etched into the floor like epitaphs. The atmosphere above the complex had changed. Satellite surveillance showed temporal drift centered around the entry shaft. One satellite reported an entire second lost during orbit, as if Earth itself had blinked. And in that blink, everything beneath Texas had rewritten itself again. Inside, those who remained experienced memory collapse, not amnesia, displacement. A surviving operative was recovered 400 kilometers from the site, wandering barefoot along a deserted highway, muttering designations for SCPs that had never been cataloged. He was carrying a photograph, a group image of Foundation personnel, dated 1973. Every face was scratched out except one, his own, but he wasn't born until 1989. Another agent emerged from the desert, believing she was still inside Site-13, insisting that the extraction hadn't happened yet. She was placed in containment. Weeks later, her body underwent spontaneous cellular regression. She de-aged 20 years in a matter of hours, then vanished. No energy spike, no anomaly, just gone. The Foundation did what it always does: sealed the shaft, collapsed the rock, erased the logs. But this time, there were whispers. Across multiple sites, Foundation personnel began reporting identical dreams. Echoes of underground corridors, of ticking clocks, of a voice whispering, "I can fix this, I just need one more chance." Dr. Shank's name was purged from active records. The Temporal Anomalies Department was disbanded, restructured, hidden. Because Site-13 hadn't just broken time, it had broken the idea of finality. There was no closure, no end, only a structure buried in contradiction, a place built from memory itself that refused to be forgotten. And somewhere below, past dust and stone and the last trace of Foundation hubris, a machine still hums, waiting for someone to remember what it was built to undo. Site-13 was never built, and yet it exists. It's not in any records, not on any map, but it waits beneath the desert, like a scar hidden beneath the skin of the world. It is not an anomaly. It is a consequence of one man's belief that he could outright failure, of one mind trying to make the world cleaner, kinder, corrected. But timelines do not accept apologies, and reality is not a draft to be edited. SCP-1730 is more than an abandoned facility. It is a monument to the dangers of containment without comprehension, a structure that houses everything that never should have been. Versions of us, of the Foundation, of every error that was erased, but not destroyed. And when the Foundation buried it, they weren't sealing it off. They were trying to forget, because if Site-13 is real, then it means there are others. Other places where mistakes became walls and fear became mortar. Other timelines curled beneath our own, like roots growing beneath graves. The last recovered audio from the site reads, "I tried to fix it, I swear. Please, let me try again." But there is no more time to rewrite, only to remember. Thank you for entering another anomaly in the containment zone. And if, one day, you hear a signal repeating from somewhere beneath your feet, don't answer, don't follow, don't dig, because the worst thing you can uncover is a place that remembers what you've chosen to forget.